Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Please be seated. Good morning. Please be seated. We will be starting. We will begin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On this bright and sunny Brussels morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Political Network for Values 7th Transatlantic Summit, Free Speech versus Regulated Speech, Strengthening the Pillars of Democracy. My name is Carolina Bayo, and on behalf of the Political Network for Values, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. We appreciate the time you have taken from your busy schedules to join the 7th Transatlantic Summit to discuss and reflect on freedom of expression. We hope that you will find the program meaningful and inspiring. You will be hearing from members of the 3 branches of government from the European Parliament, national, state, and local levels, members of academia, and civil society on a variety of aspects relating to freedom of expression, from the role of government and the legislative branch as custodians and not censors of freedom of expression, to defending truth in public discourse, to academia, culture, and media as sanctuaries of freedom, to countering censorship in disguise in international fora. The day will end with remarks from elected officials. So let's get started. This opening will be led by Mr. Stephen Bartolika and Mr. Patrick Yaki, members of the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, he is the 4th president of the Political Network for Values and member of the European Parliament representing the citizens of Croatia. He sits within the group of European conservatives and reformists. Mr. Stephen Bartolika received a doctorate in political philosophy and ethics from the Pontifical Gregorian University. In 2020, he was elected to the Croatian Parliament, and in 2024, to the European Parliament. He is the founder of the Center for the Renewal of Culture. Mr. Patrick Yaki is the co-chair of the group of European conservatives and reformists. In 2019, he was elected to the European Parliament representing the citizens of Poland. Since 2024, he is Vice President of the Law and Justice Party. Prior to being elected to the European Parliament, he was Secretary of State in the Polish Ministry of Justice and an academic teacher. Mr. Bartolika and Mr. Jaki, thank you.
So good morning to everyone. Thank you, Carolina, for the kind introduction. I want to welcome you all in my own name and on behalf of ECR to the European Parliament. It's great to see so many familiar faces and guests from over 30 countries. I'm delighted that Jose Antonio Cas will be joining us for the afternoon session. He's making the trip from Chile, his first visit to Europe since being elected president of Chile. I have many people to thank, but I will wait for the end of the conference today to make those remarks. A lot of effort has been exerted to make this summit possible here in Brussels, so we're delighted to have you. Why free speech? First, it's a fundamental right that precedes any government. so it does not depend on the will of those who manage our affairs in political life. It is something essential to human nature and makes us who we are. Throughout history, people have been willing to die, go to prison, sacrifice everything for this right. And so we stand here today in the European Parliament to say that it is not the role of the government to police the public square, to decide which opinions, beliefs, and convictions citizens can see or read. It is not the role of government. We have something in the European Union called the Digital Services Act. This legislation has many problems. It treats speech as just another commodity that needs to be regulated, not something fundamental to a free and democratic society. Inside this legislation, there are terms like hate speech, which I think is actually impossible to define precisely as a legal term. In other words, you don't know when you're committing hate speech. In practice, we see that hate speech is actually speech that those in power hate. We see the abuse of legislation that is it's growing throughout Europe. We have the example in Germany of a former Minister of Economy, Habeck, from the Greens, who reported over 700 German citizens for speech he found offensive, and they are now waiting criminal trial. We have the example of Eva Vladingerbroek, who was banned from entering Britain because of a Twitter post the Prime Minister did not approve of. So it's clearly something those in power are more than willing to use to censor and silence citizens. We saw what happened to Charlie Kirk in the United States, a young man in his prime who was always doing his work with charity, not offending anyone, tolerating people who vehemently disagreed with him, entering into dialogue with them out of love. And he was publicly assassinated, and we notice that the left did not condemn this. They were silent. Some of them cheered. But we are here to say that we reject cancel culture. We oppose, and we will not be bullied or silenced by anyone. We will not be intimidated. And I will close with, I think, a very important example of heroic witness to the truth. Alexander Solzhenitsyn dedicated his whole life to reject a monstrous lie, the lie of communism. And when he was exiled to the United States, he observed that there was a lack of courage in the West to speak basic truths out loud in public. He saw this lack of courage. There was great material prosperity, comfort, a nice standard of living, something that he could not imagine in Russia at the time, but he saw a lack of courage. So we are here to say that we will persevere in defending these basic truths. The truth of the natural family, father, mother, and their children. The truth that everyone has a right to be born. There is a hierarchy of rights. Freedom of speech is very important, but it doesn't mean much if you're not alive. So the right to life comes first. It precedes all other rights. It's just basic common sense, and we're here to defend common sense. And the dignity of every human being. It is under attack in the West, and we will not be silent. This is why I entered politics. I'm very proud to serve the people of Croatia here in the European Parliament. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I think we'll have a great summit. We are happy warriors. I expect to see lots of smiles today, even though many people, there was actually an attempt to even cancel this event. These people on the left, with all due respect, they lack the self-awareness to even notice the irony of demanding to cancel an event on free speech. They don't even see the irony of what they're doing. That's what we're dealing with. So enjoy. I look forward to many good conversations. We will heed the call of St. John Paul II. We will not be afraid. Thank you very much.
Dear members, dear experts, distinguished guests, friends of free speech, friends of freedom. We meet today in European Parliament, a place that by definition should be a temple of free debate, not regulator or censor. The title of this conference is Free Speech versus Regulated Speech. In fact, it should sound like democracy versus totalitarianism, or more, human right versus trampling on human dignity. Because it's difficult to imagine a man who is a man in full sense of this definition, and he's afraid to express himself. It is difficult to imagine a democracy without freedom of speech. It is difficult to imagine equality without full freedom. It is difficult to imagine a future and security without right to say, what do you think? There is and will not be any science without right to question various theses and theories. There is no development without constructive criticism and of thoughts. Freedom of speech is not an addition to democracy. It is not a luxury of stable time. It is a condition for its existence. As John Stuart Mill wrote, if we silence one opinion, we can silence the truth. And if we silence the truth, there is no longer any pluralism, nor democracy, nor Europe as we know it's from the best tradition. The history of Europe is a history of disputes, debates, heresy, controversy, and discord. And they were a source of progress, not a threat. Voltaire, the symbol of European enlightenment, wrote, I quote, "I do not agree with what you say, but I would give my life for your right to speak." And Edmund Burke, a conservative thinker, my favorite, and defender of constitutional order, wrote, "Evil triumphs when good people are silent." And I am happy that we are not silent in this matter. And now the facts. The last decades in the European Union has introduced or supported the mechanism that have restricted freedom of expression, often beyond classical control. First, penalization of hate speech without uniform definition. In practice, that leads to prosecuting satirical statements, punishing scientific or philosophical opinions, self-censorship of citizens and journalists. Second, administrative pressure on digital platforms. Content is deleted preventively, without court judgment, without a clear appeal procedure. Third, the prosecution of disinformation, without the clear distinction between lies and opinion. This leads to the situation where minority views are eliminated, the official narrative becomes privileged, pluralism turns into one acceptable interpretation. Those are not theoretical concerns. This is a specific practice in recent years, specifically in this building. Ladies and gentlemen, as I am a Polish, let me mention Polish philosophical and political thoughts, which has always been extremely sensitive of the problem of freedom, because freedom was taken away from us too often. Stanisław Staszic wrote, "Where there is no freedom to speak, there is neither law nor homeland." Adam Mickiewicz warned, "Gets people's voice and there will only be empty crowds." And John Paul II said directly, freedom is not to say what is pleasing, but to tell the truth. So Europe without freedom is Europe without truth. And to say it straight, Europe of lies. Europe that strip people of their dignity. Because without freedom, there is no dignity and there is no future for Europe. And we are stand to fight for freedom today. Thank you so much. And last but not least, if I may, let me also express my gratitude to my friend Stefan Bartulica. Without his hard work, consistency, and ID, this event could not take place. So thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you all for being present on this conference.
Thank you, Mr. Yaki and Mr. Bartulica. We now commence the first panel. This first panel is on the role of government in acting as a custodian and not a censor of freedom of expression. The panel will be chaired by Enrico Ghiodi, member of the European Parliament. Ms. Ghiodi is an economist, diplomat, and politician. In 2009 and in 2019, she was elected to the European Parliament representing the citizens of Hungary. Since 2021, she is a member of Fidesz. Among many other notable positions and posts, Ms. Ghiodi was Secretary of State of Hungary for European Affairs, Hungarian Ambassador to the Italian Republic, and Hungarian Ambassador to the Kingdom of Spain. Ms. Ghiodi received an MA and a PhD in International Relations from the Budapest University of Economics. Madam Chair, each speaker has a maximum of 10 minutes, and each commentator has a maximum of 5 minutes. Speakers are Luz Pacheco, President of the Constitutional Court of Peru, Clara Muzio, Deputy Head of the Buenos Aires City Government, Argentina, Ernesto Araujo, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. We will be hearing comments from Carlo Fidanza, member of the European Parliament and of the European Conservatives and Reformists Group from Italy, and Fabiola Morales, Deputy Mayor of Lima, Peru.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to chair this panel this morning. Welcome. Actually, it's very nice to be among friends, among people with whom we believe in very similar issues, and we are very much driven by the same set of values, and we are very proud of our values. It's really a privilege to chair this panel with so many distinguished guests. And we come to a subject which is really very tricky, very difficult, about the role of the state when we speak about basic freedoms. And we know very well that we live in an extremely dangerous world. Things that have been taken for granted are no longer taken for granted. For example, I was sure that when my country, Hungary, joined the European Union, it will never happen again that free speech could be limited, or someone will take the courage to tell me what I'm entitled to talk about or I'm not. And we are in a situation now in the European Union when censorship can be back, as our dear President has just emphasized, and our dear colleague Mr. Yaki said the same. So things no longer can be taken for granted, and that's why we have to be here and talk about the issues, about how important our basic freedoms are for all of us. because the state should never be a custodian, should be a custodian of fundamental rights. It should protect them and make sure that people can implement them in practice, and should never act as a censor. It should not silence lawful speech simply because it's unpopular, provocative, politically inconvenient for someone. So we have to have the freedom of speech, to publish what we want and to share the ideas we are interested in. And we also should always get the freedom of peaceful assembly, the right to meet, to organize events and gather when it's lawful and peaceful. Some may remember that in April 2024, one of our events, NatCon, we had to look for newer and newer sites for this event because local authorities in Brussels were not very keen that we get together and celebrate our values. Actually, it's a very nice coincidence, and I think someone in the skies really takes care of us. Just a few days ago, a first instance court in Brussels said that our event was lawful, and we always have to have the free choice of getting together and assembly and speak freely. After this short introduction, I will start with the presentation of our panelists, starting by Luz Pacheco, President of the Constitutional Court of Peru. She's a former member of National Tribunal of National Superintendency of Labor Inspection, former professor, researcher, director of studies and programs at the University of Piura, Santo Toribio de Mogrovejo University, and also working for other educational institutions. She holds a PhD in law from the Universidad de Navarra. So we move out from Europe. We have our dangers, but our dangers and our difficulties are no longer comparable to what people live in Latin America, which we love, which is very close to our heart, and I'm very pleased that you can start. I will try to be strict with the time, because I really would like you all to have the time for contributing and maybe answering even some questions, or react at least. If we cannot open the floor, I was instructed strictly, but at least to react to one another. So Luz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you perdón. Mejor voy a hablar en castellano.
I'll switch to Spanish. We do have interpretation available. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today to participate in this event. It's the first time I've been here. My participation will be different from that of the politicians. I'm impartial. I am not affiliated to any political party. I just represent the judiciary. And I think that is incumbent on all judges. I want to clearly state here that we could say free speech is being destabilized from many different points of view. Firstly, when we encounter hate speech, this was said very clearly and aptly. When someone is defending a point of view and another group doesn't agree, they are immediately described as someone who is reactionary, homophobic, intolerant, and so on. And they are repressed from saying what they truly think. This is particularly important when we look at the agenda of the LGBTQ community and others. Topics relating to family, sex. There, as I said, I think the reaction is very violent in nature. So it's absolutely vital that we realize that in order to build a civilized society, we need to have dialogue. Dialogue must be respectful. It must be truthful, based on beliefs. Maybe a second approach now. And any statement we make about people's conduct, there is an anthropologic vision. We all have an idea of what appropriate behavior would be, dignified behavior for a human being. This term is used to defend, for example, the right to abortion or to go against it. Same goes for euthanasia, for and against. I think it is absolutely vital that everyone bear in mind human dignity. We need a clear idea of that. And this, I think, was in mind when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed. There were communist countries and Western Christian countries. They came together to agree on rights, but they didn't agree on the foundation of this. In the case of communist countries that often tend to be atheist, they wanted to make sure there was autonomy in this and that it derived from consensus. On the other hand, we thought and still think in Christian countries that the foundation doesn't depend on individual human beings and that God provides the basis for rights. Since these two sides were not able to agree, if you read the declaration, there's only a mention of being born with inalienable rights and that we're all born on an equal footing, as it were. So yesterday and today, in the past and the future, when we see that if this right is autonomous, we now find people saying that human dignity means anyone doing what they think is right, and that boils down to self-determination. So without realizing it, we've fallen into arbitrary situations. There are no limits here. There was a sentence in an American country saying that prostitution is a form of self-determination. That is an exercise of personal freedoms, and that this is a job that has been undervalued by society, but requires greater state protection now. If we really break down this statement, prostitution isn't a form of work. At least in my country and all Western countries, work is an activity that makes a person more noble. It helps with personal fulfillment. It's a right and a duty. How can I say that it is my duty to be a prostitute or the same for anyone else? It's an option. It's a profession, but not a right. So within this dialogue that we hold, I think it's important to look at this anthropologic point of view. We don't want to employ arguments based on beliefs, but rather arguments cemented in reason. So, with that in mind, from that perspective, there was a recent decision issued by the Constitutional Tribunal. 4 of the 7 judges decided to recognize the parenthood of a woman who had a child via surrogacy. It was a masculine and female gamete that did not belong to her or to her partner. So the marriage had nothing to do with the child. But adoption might have been the more reasonable approach. But she was recognized as the mother. There was criticism leveled against this judgment. So the votes of 3 judges represented a moral stance that is incompatible with plural democracy today. However, this person who leveled the criticism said that this is on the basis of the desire to procreate. So everything that is based on rights must be looked at from an ethical, human point of view. we shouldn't set aside our beliefs to have dialogue. We need our beliefs, but we shouldn't confuse beliefs with intolerance. Tolerance allows us to treat others well, those who think differently from us, and not because they say they're speaking the truth, but rather because they're human beings. And I think that in that way we can help them to change their erroneous beliefs. The final reaction to free speech is silencing via media or politicians. Vulnerable groups are being mistreated, and the majority in society might not believe this. A clear example is surrogacy. The UN Special Rapporteur issued a report in August last year on violence against women and girls in the context of surrogacy. I'm sure you're all aware of this. Now, when I hear about reproductive rights, I have to say this doesn't sit well with me. Who reproduces, or what reproduces? Animals, plants, and the photocopier makes copies. But as human beings, we give birth to children. It's human. There is love there. Otherwise, we're just breaking ourselves down to mere animals. When I think of my mother, I don't think of a reproducer. I don't think anyone would think of their mother as a reproducer. There's much more to being a mother. So we need to really go back to the original sense of terms and not allow ourselves to be washed away by this current. When it comes to surrogacy, there's no real surrogacy. A mother is someone who gestates and gives birth. Women who give birth actually appear younger after the fact, so there's a benefit for them. And then when a mother has another child, there's an exchange of blood and cells with the next child. This is a legal term, but it's based on reality. Being a mother is a very special thing. I could go on at length, but I only had a few minutes. I really would like to thank you once again for inviting me to be here, and I stand ready to answer any of your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much for focusing our discourse here. Beliefs are not the same things as rights. We're going to move on to another country now, Argentina. We're joined by Clara Muzio.
She's the deputy head of Buenos Aires city government in Argentina. She's a former minister of public space and urban hygiene of Buenos Aires, a former undersecretary for pedestrian infrastructure of Buenos Aires. She holds a master's degree in public administration and public policy from the University of San Andres. Well, there is a change of wind in the entire South American continent, but very strong winds are blowing in Argentina. So how you see the situation, Clara? Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to have this opportunity to share some thoughts with you on freedom of expression. And before I answer more in detail about the situation in Argentina, I would just like to share a few ideas with you first. There was an article on X recently that had been shared from the Atlantic, and it described the situation in Europe. In many countries, children with Down syndrome are no longer being born. For pregnant women, and so women can know that they can abort their children if they have Down syndrome. As a mother of a child with Down syndrome, I shared a post saying that it's almost like saying a child with Down syndrome is a mistake that you have to eliminate. And there were a lot of reactions to this. Most of the reactions were quite aggressive. others saying that children with Down syndrome should not be aborted. Others, of course, are against abortion in all circumstances. But of course, it's a question of being allowed to say what you wish and this being accepted by other people. You can see some of the comments on the screen there. A lot of the comments were very dismissive of children with Down syndrome, almost as if they're not fully human. But within all of this ugliness, I allowed everyone to express their views. In my role as an elected representative, I couldn't allow these people not to speak. Of course, some of them tried to victimize me, but I'm not here to control public discourse. My role is to allow people to say what they wish within the law, within the bounds of the law. Everything should be allowed to be said, and that's my position. As an elected representative, if I draw the line between what can and cannot be said, then we all know where this is going to end up. The law allows science, allows those who wish to speak on behalf of protecting their family. So the day after I made this post on X, I had thousands of comments. And after this, I published a series of commitments to freedom of expression. And I want to take this opportunity to share those commitments with you. I set them out in 10 commitments, which are as follows. I will never shield myself behind my status as a woman to defend myself. I'll never block any user or restrict comments or encourage others to do so. I'll never insult, disrespect, or belittle anyone, even if people do that to me. I will never support attempts by the state to regulate, monitor, persecute, fine, or intimidate people for expressing themselves within the law. I'll defend the protection of anonymity, because anonymity is a legitimate tool as part of freedom of expression, especially when this is at risk. I will never ask voices to be silenced because I don't like them. As Walter Lippmann said, if everyone thinks the same, then nobody's thinking very much. I will never confuse opinions with violence or words with illegality. I don't think words are a crime. I will defend social networks. They defend freedom of expression. And I will always defend objective, biological, and scientific truth. Truth does not need censors or any manuals about inclusive language. Truth exists, and sooner or later it will prevail. And I'm here sitting before all of you today to try to speak out in defense of the right of an anonymous person to say that the birth of my child was a mistake. We have to listen to what people say, even the most aggressive people, because we have to listen to the opinion of others. We also see that human creativity, joy comes out of this. We see that people are fighting for the right causes, for the defense of truth, of freedom and protection of life. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Muchísimas gracias, Clara.
Thank you very much, Clara. Thank you for your great personal commitment and for your strong commitment to freedom of expression. I think that that was a very important lesson for us all.
North from Argentina. I'm very pleased to have here with us Ernesto Araújo, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, who will tell us how the situation is in Brazil. We know all the difficulties, and difficulty is a very mild word to say, but what people, conservative politicians live through, because there you are in permanent danger, not just for your for having some aggression by the social media. We are more or less all used to it, but physically, that you can easily find yourself in prison for what you are saying or what you are thinking. Ernesto was also deputy head of mission to the Brazilian embassies in Ottawa and Washington. He's a former director of the Department for the United States, Canada, and Inter-American Affairs in Brazil. He holds a bachelor's degree in linguistics, language, and French literature from the University of Brasilia. Ernesto, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eniko. I'm very honored to be here, very thankful, especially to Stephen Baktulica. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share some ideas with you. Yes, Brazil today, I think, is the laboratory for a new version of democracy, a fake democracy, what I like to call the dictatorship of the corruptariat, which replaces the dictatorship of the proletariat, of course. It's no longer a democracy. And how we got here, if you allow me, I'll go to some not so recent events to share a little bit with you. We go to 405 before Christ in Athens. That year, Athens, the great democratic power in Greece, was defeated by Sparta, the great totalitarian power in Greece. And immediately, Sparta started to establish oligarchic regimes all across the Greek world to implement Sparta-like regimes, totalitarian power. So totalitarian power allied with local elites in previously democratic countries to destroy democracy. I think that's very modern. So Sparta started to, let's say, to export its model, including in Athens, where a group of oligarchs in alliance with the Spartans abandoned the constitution, the civil liberties, and established a dictatorship, the infamous 30 tyrants. And yes, tyranny can be collective. Normally we think of personal tyrannies, but anyway, they created a thought police, a political police that started to kill people. They got 1,500 people killed out of 30,000 citizens. And of course, they didn't like free speech. And they didn't like Socrates. Socrates was teaching in Athens at that time. So the 30 tyrants called Socrates and, well, they say, we don't like what you're saying. We don't like that you're teaching young people to think with their own heads. Basically, that was the idea. And Socrates somehow got away with democracy was reestablished thanks to a courageous group of exiles. And democracy was there again, but was it really democracy? Sort of. It's a democracy that didn't like free speech, like some democracies of today. So 4 years later, Socrates is accused by a democratic tribunal of teaching the youth to question everything, including their own power. And as you know, they put Socrates to death. So at that time already you have a sort of self-proclaimed democracy that doesn't let its main thinker think freely. And Socrates basically was a free thinker. He was, today he could be a social influencer, right? He is the social networks. He wasn't a teacher anyway. But in his trial, at the end of the trial, Socrates, according to Plato, Socrates already realizes that he's going to be put to death. But a deal seems to emerge, a possible deal. You shut up and you have your life spared. And Socrates refuses, and he says, according to the translation I have, "Men of Athens, I shall obey the god rather than you. And while I live and am able to continue, I shall never give up philosophy or stop exhorting you and pointing out the truth to any of you." So, obey the god, right? Normally we think of Socrates as some sort of atheistic philosopher. He was not. The right of free speech and the duty of free speech, in a way, comes from God, not from man. That's what Socrates is saying. I have 5 minutes. So Socrates, if you allow me, hints at the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 4, where at some point the Jerusalem authorities don't like what the apostles are teaching and saying around the city, and they call Peter and John and order them to stop talking. And Peter and John say, "U dynameta, non possumus." We can't stop talking. So free speech is at the basis, I think, of Western civilization. Those examples show that. Both the Greek, let's say, direction, the Greek current, and the Christian current, which, by the way, are much closer than we imagined. No parliament, no Congress, no democratic institutions would exist today if not by the legacy of Socrates, and I think the legacy of the apostles. And we should follow, I think, their examples and not of their accusers. We remember Socrates. We don't remember people like Callicles or Critias or Euclides, some of the 30 tyrants. But many of our institutions today act following the example of Callicles and Euclides and Critias and not the example of Socrates. Anyway, from the Greeks to the Marxists, okay? In 1999, a very important book was published called Empire by Michael Hart and Antonio Negri, two Marxist thinkers. This book is considered by some the Communist Manifesto of the 21st century. And I think the key thing they say is, and I quote, "Truth will not make us free, but taking control of the production of truth will." Okay. They say there will be social factories for the production of truth. That's the basis of Marxism, of totalitarian regimes today. We don't see them as Marxists, but that comes from this 21st century version of Marxism, which is not the Stalin or Lenin version. It's a new version, to which China contributed a lot with its Cultural Revolution and everything that followed. But that's what we have today, this sort of approach where Western elites, together with China, are implementing as their main instrument censorship and control of narrative as a way of attaining global power. I think that's the enemy that we face everywhere, including in Brazil. We hear a lot that, oh, the West cannot impose its values to other regions. Okay, those are not universal values. We can discuss that. But the West could at least live up to its values in the West. And what is happening is that in the West, we are universalizing according to the pattern of the non-West or of the totalitarian powers. I don't believe that some people are made for totalitarianism. I think everyone is made for freedom. But if the West has this freedom tradition, well, let's live up to it. And that's not what's happening. So to give an example of how the Brazilian elite is behaving, a prominent member of the Brazilian Supreme Court, maybe the most prominent, said last year in public that we are all admirers of the Chinese regime during a discussion on free speech. Okay? So many Athenians, or at least 30 Athenians, were big admirers of the Spartan regime, right? And we know that history. So I think Brazil is an example of an elite that, in alliance with China and also in alliance with European, North American elites, is actually implementing a totalitarian regime under the mask of democracy in Brazil. 1 minute for 3 ideas of what to do. I think we need to work with the United States, especially with the Trump administration. It's very good to have a superpower that seems to care about free speech, about democracy now. The way of acting of the US under Trump is heterodox, but I think that's what is needed. They just got Latin America rid of the second main dictatorship, Venezuela. They're probably going to get us rid of Cuba, the Cuban dictatorship, in the benefit of the Cuban people, of course. Freedom lovers around the world need to work more closely with the US, and the US needs to work more closely with people who love freedom. Why? Because this needs to be a transnational network, a transnational effort, a transnational fight. It's a fight. They are fighting against us. So that's why events like this are so important, to gather people of different networks to work together. And finally, I think we need to think of ways of revamping and re-dynamizing democracy. People talk a lot about technology, the use of technology for totalitarian purposes, for social control, yes, but there's a very important and maybe a bigger possibility of using technology for democracy. Call it direct democracy, or I think we need to think of new ways of, let's say, brushing up democracy around the world and use technology for that. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ernesto, for taking us to this long journey from ancient Greeks to the reincarnation of Marxists. There was a lot of lessons from what you have said, including communism never disappears, just reincarnates. And now we come to the comments. And I will start with Carlo Fidenza, who's a great friend of us, of Patriots. Well, he lived through quite many of the stories we live through now in the former legislature, because there, in those 5 years, the conservatives were the bad guys in this house. Now we are the extremely bad guys, and they are, by having us, they are a bit better guys now. But Carlo hasn't changed, and it's important that he's the same. And he is one of the leaders of the conservatives in this house, the former member of the Chamber of Deputies in Italy, and former member of the Committee of Regions of the European Union. And what is very important, that he is the co-founder of Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy, the party which has been governing in Italy and is renewing Italy. And thanks God that in one of the big founding states of the European Union, we have a clear conservative leadership with Giorgia Meloni. So, Carlo, the floor is yours.
So still bad guys. So thank you all. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Enrico. I will speak in Italian, so I ask you to take your earphones. Grazie.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organisers and especially Stolica Tulica and all of the network for this excellent opportunity to meet. We can see from the huge attendance how important it is, and I'd also like to greet all of my colleagues, members of Parliament, friends who've come from far away. Together with Eniko, it's an honour for me to represent Europe here on this panel. Particularly now when we're looking towards Latin America, we're all looking with hope towards what's happening on that continent. We're culturally very close, and you are very dear to us in terms of cultural identity and political expression. And we have a lot of hope about what may come in the next few weeks in Peru, and then later on in Brazil, and also what we're seeing in Argentina. We've seen positive signs in recent months, including from other countries as well. It's a continent that for too long has been prey to the ideology from the Puebla forums and the Sao Paulo forums. I think it's important that it comes back to become a reliable partner for the Western world to defend the values that colleagues have so roundly referred to. Of course, I would like to come back to the topic of this panel. I think what's come out very clearly from the previous speakers, and this is also the starting point, I think, for reflections during later panels throughout today, but the starting point is this. Fundamental freedoms don't derive from the state. They precede the state. They are pre-political, and also represent the natural limit for any democratic state. Freedom of expression is not something that's granted by legislation or regulations. Law does not create freedom of expression or establish it. It recognizes it. Freedom of expression should not be seen as something that can be suspended or redefined. It's not just, that would not just be a legal problem, but it's a political problem and above all a civic problem. And today's debate shows that. Today's debate, the question is not whether or not the state should intervene in the public space, and this includes the digital space, as we've already heard about. It's already gone beyond that. The question is, how far can intervention go without becoming a threat to the freedom of expression? And this is a subtle distinction between, as the title says, a state that is custodian of freedom of expression, or a state that, even without intending to be, becomes a censor of freedom of expression. When political expression is limited or restricted, particularly in Western democracies, it's not just a legal risk, it's a historic risk. In the 20th century, we saw that censorship doesn't only happen in a sudden manner. Sometimes it's gradual. It happens in an administrative, bureaucratic way, and that's what we have to be vigilant about. So here I would just like to recall something that's once again relevant today from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was, as we know, victim of the Soviet communist regime. And in his speech to Harvard in 1978, he warned caution in the West. He wasn't talking about an immediate return of authoritarianism, but a more subtle risk. Liberty of expression that's formally guaranteed, but is hollowed out internally through self-censorship and fear of speaking. His message was that a single word of truth is worth more than the whole world. Truth shouldn't be just to provide comfort or consensus, but it should especially be heard when the truth is uncomfortable. There are a lot of cases where we can see freedom of expression being restricted in Europe. This might come out over the course of today. The Finnish deputy, Falvi Rasensen, who was punished for their freedom of expression, or what we see happening every single day in the UK, where normal citizens are being put in prison for expressing their opinions. There are a lot of concrete examples of that. So today, gagging of freedom of expression is not done only through courts or through laws. It's also, and perhaps especially, done through a broader cultural mechanism that we can term wokeism. It's a dictatorship of the politically correct, a climate in which dissent is refused, often not because because it's attacked for what it says. You can't attack truth, but because of how it is said, people are not allowed within the public space to debate. So freedom of expression can lead people to being stigmatized, isolated, or preventative censorship. This kind of process doesn't need bans to be made explicit, but there's an idea of self-censorship, the idea that certain words can't be said. So it's not about freedom of expression is not abolished by law, but it's merely hollowed out because people who want to debate are expelled. They're cast out from public debate. We want to think that the West is immune from these kinds of trends, but that's not the case. We're all, of course, aware of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I think that shows how fragile we are and that these kinds of trends can have the most extreme outcomes. When we put an end to pluralist debate, then people are censoring themselves. And if freedom of expression is not allowed, then we have to have the courage to say that. And so this brings us back to a key tenet, a dialogue between Joseph Ratzinger and Jürgen Habermas. The liberal state is pre-political. It cannot be created alone. If fundamental values are seen as concessions that can be revoked, then the risk is that the state becomes the arbiter of truth. That's not the role of the truth. The state should not be choosing which opinions are legitimate. It has to provide a freedom for freedom of expression. Without that, there's no proper political debate. And without debate, democracy loses its substance and it loses this truth that we were talking about earlier. Freedom of expression is not something that power concedes or grants. It should be a fundamental state for all citizens in Europe and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Grazie, Carlo. Grazie anche per...
Thank you, and thank you for that very clear message about how strong it is to be brave.
Also for telling us how sophisticated the toolkit can be against free speech. It's very important. And the final conclusions from another distinguished speaker, comments from Fabiola Morales. She's a vice chancellor of Lima municipality. So we went on a long geographical journey and we are back to Peru. She's a former congresswoman of the Republic of Peru, a former secretary general of Renovación Popular, and she holds a PhD degree in communication and media studies from the Universidad Complutense de Madrid. Fabiola, some conclusions and what you would like to share with us. Thank you. Hola.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I would like to salute the organisers of this event. It's the second time I've attended. I was there 2 years ago in New York, and I think that behind the scenes of these events is a clear energy and impetus that leads us down our quest to find the truth, to defend the truth, and to defend freedom. Nowadays, this organization has such energy to defend freedom and truth, but this energy could be taken away from us from one day to the next. I want to talk now about free speech. As has been said here, free speech is not a concession made by political power, but it is a natural right that comes before the state. The state has the duty to recognize, respect, and protect this freedom. That is spelled out in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as in the Magna Carta of the Peruvian Republic. There, it establishes the freedom of information, opinion, expression, and dissemination of thought via any means, and it is recognized as a right that everyone has. When the state forgets this tenet and assumes the role of ideological arbiter of what can or cannot be said in the public space, the state stops being a custodian of freedoms and turns into a censor, and this is dangerous. A recent concerning example coming from my country is a resolution issued by the National Election Board. For those of you who aren't so familiar, on the 12th of April this year, there will be a general election. With that in mind, the National Election Board established as an electoral offence the use or referral to religious terms, no matter which faith these terms may come from. As a result of this provision, prosecution has been started against political parties because their candidates in some way mentioned God, including via expressions that belong to Western Christian cultures. These are colloquial expressions entrenched in our culture. For example, God, country, and family. That statement was on an electoral banner. Or a candidate said, "We will make history with God by our sides." Or in social media, just because they've referred to God, not to anyone else. We're not talking about incitement to violence, nor exclusion, nor denial of rights. People are being prosecuted just because they are speaking about their beliefs. This type of decisions shows a worrying trend. The use of state-level legislative bodies to wipe out, neutralize certain opinions in the democratic framework, particularly targeting those parties we defend life, family, and fundamental rights, fundamental freedoms. They base this on state neutrality, but we see no state neutrality, quite the opposite. At the moment, civil servants are exercising political partiality. They are partial. Because those parties, like ours, when we see our views derived from social, democratic, and Christian values, now we're under attack. In the Article 2 of the Political Constitution of Peru, all people have the right not to suffer from discrimination on the basis of race, sex, language, religion, opinion, class, or any other kind of reason. However, the National Election Board is straying beyond its bounds. It is breaching the Magna Carta and the Constitution, the rights that are bestowed unto citizens. This breaches free speech and freedom of religion. we're not just talking about any kind of fine being imposed, but we're talking about fines that can go up to €6,892, even as far as €41,353. €300 is minimum wage in Peru. So just to give you an idea of the sheer enormity of these fines, the excessive amount of money that political leaders will have to pay in the way of fines just because they are participating in the current electoral campaign and they have mentioned God. As a result, today we wanted to talk to you about what is happening in our country, because the same might happen in other countries. Now it's important for us all to work together, join forces to defend free speech and all referrals, all references to God in predominantly Christian Western countries. The Constitutional Court in Peru, represented by Ms. Pacheco, was very firm in stating on multiple occasions that the exercise of the punitive power of the state, whether it's administrative or elective, all of this is subject to the same principles governing criminal law, i.e., legality and typicality. Offences must be described explicitly, clearly, and unequivocally, so that we can distinguish between different types of conduct, what is banned, and what the legal consequences are. When an authority punishes by excessively interpreting the law, straying beyond its bounds, or when they create implicit prohibitions, they don't only undermine due process, but they also erode legal certainty and the rule of law. But above all, it erodes human dignity. The state, particularly with its electoral, legislative and judicial bodies in mind, has a duty not to purge public debate of uncomfortable references for some people. What they should be doing is guaranteeing public debate, particularly in election times. Therefore, we cannot ban the mentioning of God in public discourse. It gives the impression that they are persecuting candidates on the basis of their faith. And as some constitutionalists have mentioned, there is a progressive elite entrenched in state entities, and this represents a threat to the interests of freedom. We should all be defending freedom and truth in democracy. I'd like to leave it there because my time has run out, but I thought it would be useful to give you this example. We think that this is a hugely extreme example of just how far states can go today in a democratic country like ours, because 2 or 3 civil servants at some point decided that they would apply restrictions that go beyond personal freedom and breach key rights. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Fabiola.
Thank you very much, Fabiola. You spoke to us about how important it is for the state to promote public debate.
We are running out of time, so we will not have time for questions, but just 3 important takeaways from this panel and a quotation for conclusion. First, we are not alone. Freedom-loving people are everywhere, are ready to fight, and we have to stand firm to succeed. And finally, that it is just a question of time, because freedom cannot be oppressed for long. We have learned this in all our countries and very much committed to that. And as in this panel we had quite a remarkable number of Spanish-speaking people, I thought I would conclude with the words of Miguel de Cervantes in Spanish, with my favorite quotation. I know most of the people know in this room this, but I very much love it. And maybe not everyone knows it. So what Don Quixote says to his Sancho Panza? And I will speak in Spanish. La libertad es uno de los...
Freedom is one of the most precious gifts heaven gave to men. The treasures under the earth and beneath the sea cannot compare to it. And so that's why we owe our life to truth. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, there's a 10-minute coffee break. 10-minute coffee break. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a 10-minute coffee break. 10-minute coffee break. You're welcome to be back in 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please find your seat. Please find your seat. We will shortly be beginning the second panel of our morning. We would like to call panelists of the second panel. Panelists of the second panel are invited to take their seat. I hope you can hear me. Two housekeeping matters before we begin the second panel. Many of you have asked for Wi-Fi. There is an open Wi-Fi network under the Wi-Fi options available on your devices. It is EP-visitors. Interpretation is being provided in English, Spanish, French, and Italian. The channels of the language are indicated on the booths of the interpreters. We have a wonderful group of interpreters with us this morning, and we are extremely grateful for their valuable work. We move on to the second panel of this morning, the role of the Parliament in legislating without silencing, featuring a spotlight on the EU Digital Services Act. The chair of this panel is Mr. Paolo Insalvini, member of the European Parliament and of the European Conservatives and Reformists Group, representing the citizens of Italy. In 2024, he was elected to the European Parliament and is a member of the Fratelli d'Italia party. In 2022, he was a candidate to the Chamber of Deputies of Lombardy. He is the current president of the National Youth in Lombardy. Mr. Insalvini, speakers have a maximum of 10 minutes, and commentators have a maximum of 5 minutes. Speakers today are Tom van den Driesche, member of the European Parliament, Patriots for Europe Group from Belgium. Mr. Branko Grims, member of the European Parliament from the EPP Group from Slovenia. Laurence Trochu, member of the European Parliament from the ECR Group from France. And commentators are Nicolás Mayoraz, member of Parliament from Argentina, and Andrés Castillo, member of Parliament from Ecuador. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Grazie mille, grazie di cuore.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to Paola and all of the staff for the work they've put into making this day happen. Thanks to my friend Stephen. Every day we're here in the European Parliament working and fighting together. And of course, I would like to greet all of my colleagues and all of you who have come from across the world. I think that's a sign of how well this network is going. This network, above all, is aimed at defending our non-negotiable principles. These principles that pre-existed us, they pre-exist the state. They have been handed down by nature and the city of God that the Pope referred to just a few weeks ago. And we should take inspiration from this in our political duty, our political vision. We have to be faithful to our Christianity here in Europe and in the rest of the world, because Christians are also being discriminated against around the world with violence, persecution, death, but also here in Europe and in the West. Unfortunately, spaces where you should be free to express your beliefs are increasingly closing, and Pope Leo has said this, that we're seeing a de facto situation where we're reaching an Orwellian situation, and words as meanings are being twisted, are being turned around, and we see that all too often the ideology of so-called inclusivity is actually excluding all of those who are trying to speak the truth. Here, every day in the European Parliament, together with the political network, we try to defend the values of God, country, and family. We do that with bravery, love, consistency, with a smile, but also with the determination of those people who know that the destiny of Europeans depends on us. The censorship that we often see in the European Parliament from the left often, but also sometimes from the centre-right, they're trying to limit our freedom of expression, either through intimidatory acts, as we saw recently when we spoke out against the My Voice, My Choice, which we think is unacceptable. And they also censor us in legislative terms. And that's going to be the topic now, the DSA. Some people think that there were legitimate, positive reasons behind the Digital Services Act to try to ensure that platforms couldn't trample upon our personal freedom of expression and rights. But unfortunately, it's now becoming a tool in the hands of institutions and the left, and they're trying to limit our possibility to speak the truth. To begin with, we're going to hear from my colleagues here in the European Parliament, and then afterwards we'll hear from people outside and see how they see this legislation. I'd like to start by thanking Laurence Trochou, a dear friend and a colleague in the ECR. She's coordinator in the Women's Rights Committee, a member of the Subcommittee on Public Health, and vice president of the Delegation for Relations with Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. She has her background is in philosophy and training from Paris Sorbonne University. Welcome, Laurence. I would also welcome Mr. Tom van den Driessen. He is a colleague here in the European Parliament. He represents Belgium, part of the Vlaams Belang Party, and a member of the Patriot Group. He's always fought for freedom. In 2024, he won a case against Meta, who censored one of his posts on social media. And today he's frequently spoken out about how the DSA is being improperly used. I'd also like to welcome Branko Grims, a brave member from the EPP group. He's founder of the SDS and former member of the Slovene National Parliament. He, again, has also frequently fought against censorship and the incorrect application of the DSA. Welcome to all of you. I'd like to start with Laurence. She has a philosophical background, so I think she can tell us about freedom. That's something that's often lacking here in the European Parliament. Freedom of expression is essential for our democracy and our institutions. So, Laurence, is the DSA a legitimate tool to regulate the online world, or does it hide serious dangers? You have the floor.
I'll be speaking French. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Paolo, for thinking of me for this roundtable. And also, I'd like to also thank Stephen Bartolizza for being behind the initiative of this event. I'd also like to say hello to all of my colleagues. I think in addition to the groups represented, we all have this desire to preserve our freedoms, and we're all fighting united for that. I'm part of the Identity Freedom political party in France under Marion Maréchal, plural freedoms, because we know all too often these freedoms are undermined in our countries, in our Western countries. It's been mentioned several times. But, of course, any policy and any way into politics defines what it means to be humans. We never legislate in the void. We always are based on anthropology, our idea of what it means to be a human, what freedoms are, what responsibility is incumbent on humans. And there's an idea that can help us to think. It's Saint Thomas d'Aquin tells us that human beings are rational and free beings, who are governed by reason. This was mentioned earlier when there was a reference to John Paul II. So under this idea, freedom isn't without license or limits, but it's actually the condition for morality. So the criterion of reason is important here. Humans act freely as long as they act in line with reason. Without freedom, there is no responsibility, nor virtue, no authentic political life. And that's what brings us together here today. Under the different types of freedoms, we have the freedom of expression, free speech. As was reminded, this is absolutely vital for any democratic country. We need debate, the opposition of ideas, the possibility of being wrong, to challenge people and to convince people. Paolo mentioned that I am a member of the FAM committee, gender equality, and I'm a coordinator there. And that's really what is missing in that committee. I want to give you an example. Recently, we were given the opportunity of inviting experts to take part in a hearing that we often do. And I suggested that we invite the UN rapporteur on surrogacy, Rima Al-Salam. That was refused because the women in that committee don't like the results of that report. These women are mainly left-wing in nature. So rather than hearing different points of view, listening to contradiction, they rejected my request. And this is the epitome of intolerance, because even those who say they are open-minded and that they are moving in the direction of progress, and that they say they're tolerant, well, they're demonstrating the opposite. They say that they want to protect citizens, but if you do that by silence and gagging people, this is not a mature society. It's a society that no longer believes in human reason as a tool for debate, a tool that can give life to a democracy. So as you see, this freedom of expression, free speech, is no longer a liberal luxury. It shouldn't be subject to political or ideological whim. It is the very foundation of humanity. It's our common sense, common good. By discussion, by challenging ideas, not by decree, we can make progress. But a society that restricts free speech in the name of good is overstepping its power. That's when things become concerning. There are countries that have experienced great oppression, and they know this better than us. If we go back through history, we see denial of truth being a key factor of oppression, and that is really worrying. The Digital Services Act is something we need to talk about. We can recognize the fact that the digital sphere needs to be regulated. That needs to be done. Doing nothing would probably be a political mistake. But the digital world is not neutral. It shapes conduct, imagination, desire. There's a real challenge that we are coming up against in the digital sphere. The economic predatory nature of these large platforms that are raking in data and so on, that's worrying. There's another topic that I'm not able to get tabled in the FAM committee: pornography online, child sexual abuse material. There are addictive algorithms that lead to dependence. Children get hooked. There we need to act firmly to combat the suffering that children experience. We saw that with TikTok or online e-commerce platforms that circulated completely unacceptable content. We're talking about childlike sex dolls. Marion Maréchal spoke out against that was happening on one of the platforms. Public authority has a duty to take action to protect the most vulnerable in our society, particularly children. And it's particularly because this legislation is necessary, it needs to be fair. It's necessary, but it needs to be fair. And the DSA, the Digital Services Act, as it stands today, produces the opposite effects to those that we would like to see. This is concerning. Independent monitoring is imposed on platforms. We're seeing a structural incentive moving towards censorship. Platforms are blocking, deleting certain references. And sometimes this is just through ideological zeal. There are many, many examples. Political accounts may also be suspended without clear explanations. Legal content that is bothersome is deleted. We see that there is an issue. Mila accounts, I have been taking action to get these accounts reinstated, but everything is deleted after 24 hours. This is just because someone wants to express their opinion, an opinion that is not illegal, but it doesn't fit in with the majority's way of thinking. In the UK, certain tweets lead to prosecution. I think the content is very vague here, and the justification is vague. I was also prosecuted for incitement to hatred on the basis of gender neutrality. I won that case, but the very definition is at the heart of the problem. It is intentionally vague, it's subjective, and the bounds, the scope is very vague. Any criticism towards a certain political belief becomes an offence. Everything can be reported and everything can be deleted. So who's deciding this? On what basis? And what are the safeguards? Private moderators, algorithms, NGOs that are activists, they're recruiting arbiters. So it's a really concerning trend. Political discourse is no longer protected by law. It's tolerated by private actors. It's the heart of our democracy that is being shaken. It leads us to a conclusion that perhaps is actually the driving force behind our commitment. The judiciary taking control of the political sphere is extremely worrying and is happening via the digital sphere. Democratic legal mechanisms that are taking over here, and there's a political abdication here. Governing isn't about hiding behind laws. Governing is about owning your decisions and protecting principles and freedoms while punishing real misuse, real offences. Our society is being weakened here. Yes, we need to regulate digital, but we should not give up who we are. We should not sacrifice our freedoms. We should not do this under the guises of moral security. And thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie mille, Laurent.
Thank you very much, Laurence. And thank you also for reminding us of those rather impartial NGOs who are so involved in the EU, including in green policies and everything that pertains to family and life. We know that some of them just want to damage us and our freedom of expression. Because some are trying to do away with posts or any kind of expression of uncomfortable truth. People are banned from social media or have post deleters because we simply say that a child is born of a man and a woman and that children should not be bought and sold, or because we say that children and the maternal link are worthy of our protection. And Tom here has seen his posts removed from Meta, and after many cases of shadow banning, decided to take this company to court. And he managed to show these rather obscure, opaque mechanisms on these platforms. And he's going to tell us about this experience and tell us about what he's learned, what is a platform between digital platforms, political power, and our freedom of expression. Go ahead, please, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me start with a simple statement. The European Union is losing its way. And I do not say this lightly. Just last year, J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, said it very clear in Munich that one of the most worrying evolutions in Europe today is a decline of freedom of expression. The idea that speech is increasingly treated as something dangerous, something that must be managed, filtered, and controlled. And he was right. Because what we are witnessing is not just a legal debate about content moderation. It's something deeper, much deeper, something political, something democratic. So the real question is, why is the EU losing its way? This answer is, in my opinion, very clear. Because real change of policy is no longer allowed. And that is not a minor institutional problem. It goes to the very heart of democracy. In a democracy, elections are not just some kind of ritual. They are supposed to correct the course. When citizens reject a policy on migration, on climate, on security, on cultural questions, political leaders are supposed to listen, adjust, and sometimes change direction. But in today's European Union, that correction mechanism increasingly fails. People vote for a different migration policy, and yet the same approach continues. They demand realism and affordability in climate policy, but the Green Deal remains untouchable dogma. They resist ideological experiments imposed from above, and they are told that their resistance is extremism. So what happens when a political system no longer allows real change? It starts to protect itself. And that is why censorship measures become so tempting. Not necessarily censorship in the old-fashioned sense, with open bans and police raids, but a modern form of control, digital, bureaucratic, centralized, and disguised as safety. And that is where we see the instrument like the Digital Services Act, and now even proposal like a so-called democracy shield. We are told these are designed to protect democracy, but I will say it very bluntly. They increasingly look like tools designed to protect the institutions from democracy. And step by step, we slide into something that feels like a union of free nations and more like that feels less like a union of free nations and more like a totalitarian construction, centralized, bureaucratic, and intolerant of dissent. A kind of EU SSR, not with violence, but with regulation, administrative pressure, and control of the narrative. Now let me be clear, I do not idealize the platforms. I do not trust big tech. These companies are run by managers and shareholders, driven by profit and public relations. They do not exist to defend the freedom of speech, and they will not resist political pressure when it becomes inconvenient to them. But I also don't trust European institutions to become the arbiters of speech. When governments get involved in deciding what is acceptable to say, it rarely stops at illegal content. It expands step by step from illegality to harm, from harm to risk, from risk to inconvenience. So yes, regulation can be necessary. But then the question becomes, what is the goal of the regulation? The goal should never be to create a safe debate. The goal should be to protect fundamental freedoms, to empower citizens, to strengthen freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, and freedom of expression. Because free speech is not the enemy of democracy, it is its foundation. It exists precisely for the uncomfortable opinions, for the unpopular voices, for the criticism that power does not like. The Digital Services Act is often presented as a simple, reasonable idea. What is illegal offline should be illegal online. That's fine, as far as it goes. But the real test of democratic maturity is the reversal. What is legal offline must remain legal online. And there the DSA becomes problematic, because the DSA claims not to regulate content, but it obliges platforms to identify and mitigate so-called systemic risks. That sounds technical, but it is deeply political. It shifts power away from independent courts and towards platforms, moderation teams, algorithms and networks of trusted flaggers, and it does not work through open bans. It works through quiet mechanisms that shape modern public debate. Reducing reach, limiting visibility, downgrading accounts, suppressing distribution. In other words, you may speak, but fewer and fewer people are allowed to hear you. That practice has a name: shadow banning. And shadow banning is particularly corrosive in a democracy because it maintains the appearance of freedom while manipulating the reality of debate. It is censorship without the accountability of censorship. And in my own country, Vlaams Belang has experienced this reality for years. Shadow banning, invisibility, reach destroyed, not because something was illegal, but because it was politically unwelcome. In fact, the party took Facebook to court, and the ruling confirmed that shadow banning occurred. So this is not paranoia, it's not theory, it's reality. And what the DSA does is to make this permanent, because it creates a framework in which entire political viewpoints, nationalist, conservative, Eurosceptic, and can be algorithmically downgraded. No notice, no explanation, no accountability, no real appeal. You may still speak, but nobody is allowed to hear you. And that is a most dangerous form of censorship, because it keeps the illusion of freedom while controlling the outcome. And at that point, Bertolt Brecht's famous line comes to mind, written about authoritarian system. And I quote, "If the government is unhappy with the people, why doesn't it choose another one?" That is a danger we are drifting towards. A system that accepts the people only when the people behave as expected. When citizens vote wrong, the answer is not self-reflection. The answer is control. Control of speech, control of debate, control of what is acceptable. The Russian writer Elena Gorokova grew up in the Soviet era, yet her quote describes our political age perfectly. And I quote, "The rules are simple. They lie to us. We know that they are lying, and they know that we know that they are lying. But they keep lying to us, and we keep pretending to believe them." And that is a psychological foundation of this entire system. So let me ask openly here in this room, is there really anyone who believes that unlimited asylum migration will bring us doctors and engineers who will pay for our pensions? Is there really anyone who believes that the Green Deal will save the world when Europe only produces around 6% of global CO2 emissions? Is there really anyone who believes that a man becomes a woman and is therefore entitled to share the locker room with our daughters simply by putting on a dress? Yet opposition to this nonsense is labelled disinformation. It's time we stop pretending. It's time we stop acting as we believe what we do not believe. And it's time we stop allowing these institutions to silence those who dare to say it out loud. Because that is what this is all about. It's not about safety. It's not about misinformation. It's not about hate speech. It's about whether Europe remains a democratic civilization where citizens are free or becomes a bureaucratic structure where democracy is managed and dissent is punished. So yes, Europe is losing its way. And that is why we need a European rebirth, a revival, or even a renaissance. A return to democracy, a return to free debate, a return to civil liberties and fundamental rights. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at crossroads. One path leads to a centralized Europe, a Soviet-style construction, totalitarian in spirit, bureaucratic in method, and intolerant of dissent. The other path leads back to the original European idea, free nations, sovereign people, subsidiarity, pluralism, and the freedom to speak without being silenced. And that is a choice we must make. Because if unelected networks decide what you can say, what you can hear, and what you can think, then democracy becomes a managed illusion. And free speech is not the enemy of democracy. Free speech is the last line of defense. I thank you.
Grazie Tom, hai detto bene.
Thank you, Tom. You're quite right. It's not hate speech, quite the opposite. It's common sense. Common sense is all too often censored in favour of woke, progressive content. And this is slowly creating the dictatorship of conform thought. This is not implemented through arms, but through these types of tools. So, having heard from you, I'll now give the floor to Branko Grims. As I said before, he has often spoken out against the Digital Services Act. And I would like to ask you, is the DSA explicitly encouraging woke ideology and cancel culture? And is it trying to repress dissent and common sense? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks to you all that you are here in such a big number. And special thanks to Mr. Bartulica for organizing this important and, as we all see, very successful event. Well, what is the freedom of speech? George Orwell once said that freedom of speech is to tell people what they do not want to hear. And if we speak about Orwell in this House, I think it's important to emphasize that George Orwell, his legendary Roman novel 1984, wrote as a warning to humanity and not as an instructions for use in the third millennium. So basic human rights, the freedom of speech is protected by Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations and the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and also many other basic acts which defend human rights. Well, Digital Services Act, EU, is obviously against all of them. It's in contradiction which is unbelievable. Digital Services Act, such as it is, should even never be proposed, have never been proposed. If you would be, as we normally say, under the rule of law, because those basic acts should be obeyed. But, you know, when we speak about human rights, especially freedom of speech, many people, especially in the European Commission, act like they have forgotten about those acts. But those acts are in power and should be obeyed. So, first of all, what is wrong with the Digital Act. It allows censorship. And with censorship, that means that it is obviously a totalitarian act and must be abolished retroactively, with including all its consequences, including also the 120 million euro fine for X and Mr. Jan Max. This punitive act of European Commission will have numerous negative consequences on relations between the European Union and the United States. And those relations, having good relations, are of course in our strategic interest. So this is why we should reject this DSA EU Act completely. What is special with this act is that it allows more and more censorship. For example, we have now in Spain extreme leftist government, and if this government decides that something, which can be true of course, is hate speech, under DSA it should be completely censored in the whole European Union, and as a matter of fact, as this works in the whole world. So this act is completely unacceptable. It's a totalitarian act, and those who imposed it, those who stick to it, those who voted for it, should be held responsible for that. Because they were warned, they had been warned before they voted for this act that it will lead to censorship. But nobody wanted to hear that, especially that majority that has been in the former mandate in this House. This is why DSA must be completely revoked immediately. Well, EU Commission is misusing under this act the taxpayers' money for censorship, because fact-checking or trusted, you know, I don't trust them at all, as a matter of fact, and believe me that I have good reasons for that. All this is just imposing leftist propaganda and, of course, censorship. And for this, using taxpayer money is misusing the taxpayers' money. And those who are doing this should be held responsible also for that. And you know, if you censor your own nation or nations in Europe, then you won't take a long time to try to exchange those people, because you obviously don't trust them. And that's what we are facing now in Spain. And of course we are facing now in the almost whole European Union. This is what is happening now. And this is why we have to listen to Orwell very carefully, because Orwell once said that lie has become truth and the past is forgotten, and we should never allow that. We must now return to Western civilization as a whole, as it was. And we must remember that Western civilization is based on Christian values. And Europe is, by suppressing the freedom of speech, is by imposing the censorship, as a matter of fact, losing its soul. That's why we must defend the freedom of speech, and when we defend the freedom of speech, we defend our nations, we defend Europe, we defend the magnificent Western civilization. With this I will conclude, and I will conclude as I always do in the European Parliament. When I did it for the first time, half of those were in shock. God bless you, God bless Europe, and God bless Western civilization.
Grazie, Branko. Grazie.
Thank you, Branko. Thank you for that analysis and for your courage in supporting positions not just in this context but in the Parliament, including within a political group that's not always, where it's not always easy to do that. So thank you very much for the role that you're playing. And thank you for reminding us of that civility that we need to discover one that we have in common with our brothers and sisters in Latin America. We try to defend Christian values, freedom of expression, and the dignity of life. And with that, I would like to welcome Nicola Mayoraz and Tomasa Yakui Yahome, and particularly Nicolas. I would like to welcome you. You're a member from Argentina, from the Milei Party, and president of the Constitutional Affairs Committee in the Chamber of Deputies in Argentina. He's a lawyer by training and profession and studied at the Catholic University of Argentina. You have the floor, please, sir.
Grazie, Paolo. Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me today. Thank you for those involved in organising this. This is an issue both for Europe and for America. The concern around the DSA is justified. Free speech is a fundamental right deriving from the dignity of human beings. Without that right, it's difficult to imagine how one could be fully fledged in one's rights as a human being. But here, it should be a pre-political right, but the state is subverting this, and certain opinions are just tolerated depending on politicians in power at the time, and things change rapidly. The DSA contains provisions that concern us. It encourages platforms to become the police of thought. We have moderation of content and the prevention of harm. It's under that guise. But who decides what is legitimate information? Who decides what is hate speech versus uncomfortable criticism? Sometimes things are opaque. These are faceless entities. There is no accountability. We have unelected staff deciding what opinions are okay and what ones aren't. This is not democracy. Our responsibility as legislators is not to control public debate, but rather to protect it. Democracy and free speech as one of its pillars is defended by transparency, not via secret algorithms. Legal frameworks should pursue specific offences. There shouldn't be state oversight of what people think. We see what the EU is doing with the DSA, and we worry that it might not end well. In many countries, social networks are the only shelter for dissidents. In the previous panel, we heard about specific cases, but we could also mention Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela. There are examples of censorship and repression there, gagging of voices, and supposed protection of democracy. Or in Brazil, where the X platform has been banned because it didn't comply with arbitrary rules under the pretext of combating disinformation and protecting democracy. But the EU cannot fall into this trap. If the price of freedom is eternal vigilance and monitoring, today more than ever we need to stand ready with our eyes wide open, because we are in front of a perfect paradox of modern authoritarianism, destroying freedom just to protect it, saving ourselves from evil by censoring the debate before it even happens. We know that this is a huge, huge challenge, and we are facing a variety of obstacles. But here today I want to recall the fact that here in this Parliament I want to remember people like Robert Schuman, a great forefather of the EU. Despite the difficulties of those times, the painful memories of the Second World War, he advocated for unity, taking the first few steps towards the coal and steel community, but always focusing at the very centre humans as the main tenet that must be respected fully. Or if you think about George Orwell, he clearly said that if freedom means anything, above all, it means the right to say to other people what they don't want to hear. So as a result, we need to speak very clearly on this. The threat isn't coming from citizens. Citizens always speak freely. It comes from bureaucrats who are gagging and undermining this right.
Grazie, Nicolas.
Thank you, Nicholas. We understand that Pope Leo is quite correct because we've all referred to this Orwellian trend. But we are trying to bring back truth to our words and common sense. Apologies. I introduced Tommaso before, but actually we have Andres Castillo here. Perhaps I was being affected by the woke trend where men and women get mixed up. Thank you for being here. Andres Castillo, a member of the Parliament for Ecuador and part of the Committee for Sovereignty and Security, and a member of National Democracy Action. You have the floor.
Gracias, Paolo. Un saludo cordial y cariñoso.
Thank you very much, and a warm greeting to all of you who are here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for organising this event. We have to be able to talk about these issues that are so important in the world, and this is an excellent opportunity to build relations between Europe and Latin America. I wanted to start by saying that freedom of expression can't just be an empty statement. It's done through day-to-day permanent actions. Because we see freedom of expression, we see that it's on paper, both left and right. But when it comes to actually applying it, implementing it, perhaps freedom of expression shows that actions are more important than words. And this is really important to keep in mind. And I'm saying this because the topic of the debate on this panel was how can we legislate without silencing? As Laurent said, if you're trying to cancel people who think differently from you, we see that's unfortunately something that happens quite often in our countries and organizations. People don't even want to listen to other opinions because they fear that this dissent could be uncomfortable for the dominant powers. And this is really not what's meant by freedom of expression. And so I believe in what Cicero said. He believed that if there's a conflict between the rule and justice, then we should always opt for the side of justice. And what's happening now in the world is not just when it comes to freedom of expression. If you say that dissenting voices should be the cause of concern, that's not right. We have the right to say what we believe without undermining the dignity of others. So we can't prevent people from having the opportunity to speak, but there's also a responsibility. Free speech can't go as far as encouraging crimes. And this is important to remember. If you listen to Mr. Maduro or Ortega, they use the language of fascism to speak out against people who don't agree with them. And we know that fascism is criminal. We saw that in the Nuremberg trials. And that's where the limit of freedom of expression lies. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights, as well as the African Union of Human Rights and other international bodies, have said that we as holders of public office have to have a higher level of tolerance towards criticism than general citizens. But the limit lies is that you cannot incite crimes. Because we have a higher responsibility. This type of legislation, such as what we're talking about right now, is a negative experiment when it comes to developing freedom of expression. We in Latin America, who are in favor of freedom, are willing to do everything necessary to ensure that the international legal system, in international treaties, conventions, human rights legislation, and so on, stick to this principle of freedom of expression. It's an innate, natural right of all human beings. And its natural law is a key source of our laws. Private property, personal integrity, and freedom of expression is part of that. So all of these international fora have to understand that this message shouldn't just stay in this type of meeting, but it should be subject to our commitment that it will go beyond the meeting today. Events such as this one are an excellent opportunity, and it means that we can move beyond the confines of our own countries. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andres. Thank you to everyone who has participated in today's discussion. To conclude, I think it allows us to send out a message, not just to the people here in this room, but those outside of this room, outside of these walls, and in particular, those people who want to try to stop us from being here today and say what we think. They can call us cavemen or fascists, they can censor us, but they can never close our mouths, and they will never be able to gag the truth, because truth will never be undermined by their lies and their ideologies. We're here with one mission. It's not just a political mission, it's a vital mission. And if we are bold, we will win. And so I will never give in. Thank you all very much.
Super. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we make way for the last panel of the morning. We invite panelists and Ms. Margarita de la Pisa to take your seats. The last panel of the morning takes us to another perspective on the role of the legislative branch in defending truth in public debate, building spaces for dialogue. Panel chair is Mrs. Margarita de la Pisa, member of the European Parliament and member of the group of Patriots for Europe representing the citizens of Spain. She is a Vox Party member, a member of the European Parliament since 2019. Ms. de la Pisa sits within the Committee on Public Health and the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. She received a degree in pharmacology with a specialization in biotechnology from the Complutense University of Madrid. And last but not least, she and her husband are parents to 9 children. Mrs. de la Pisa, speakers have a maximum of 10 minutes and commentators have a maximum of 5 minutes. Speakers are Lucy Akello, Member of Parliament from Uganda, Jesse Okijo Onua Kalusi, Member of the House of Representatives from Nigeria, Santiago Santurio, Member of Parliament from Argentina, Nicolás Ferreira, Member of Parliament from Brazil, and Roland Portillo, Member of Parliament from Guatemala. We will be receiving comments from Rodrigo Iván Cortés, Vice Chair of the Political Network for Values from Mexico. Mrs. de la Pisa, the panel is yours.
Muchas gracias. Pues damos comienzo.
Thank you very much. Let's kick off the third panel of this extremely interesting event, Defending Truth in Public Debate, Building Spaces for Dialogue. It's an honour to be able to welcome this event here to the European Parliament. I'd like to thank the Political Network for Values because we have representatives of more than 30 nationalities. This gives us the opportunity to work together to build ties of friendship and care. For more than 50 years, certain sectors of the establishment have imposed political discourse that is based on neo-language, full of euphemisms, ambiguities, words that sound great, but they hide a deep and systemic ideological manipulation that tried to transform our culture and our basic tenets to the extent that, paradoxically, they are able to promote the exact opposite of what they claim to defend. They mention inclusion, but they exclude. They talk about equality, but they generate inequality. They talk about dignity, but they attack it. Human rights are attacked under the guise of protecting them. This has brought us to a moral short circuit, and it has weakened our ability to react. They are also governing the way that we're able to work together. They're breaking down solidarity. This has severely damaged our society, and now it's time to respond, call things as they are, name things as they are, use words and know what they mean based on common sense. We shouldn't follow the majority opinion, but the shared reason that we have and the truth. In the previous panel, we saw how important it is to have politicians and political projects that counter this ideological current. We need to ensure that free speech is upheld in Parliament so that then, after the fact, we can do the same in the streets. We're all threatened, and this event was almost cancelled. We're just defending the family and truth. We need to act decisively. We cannot allow any attempt to silence us. If this happens here in this House, what happens in the streets? Parliament, we should extend our commitment to society, universities, companies, families. We need to normalise the defence of order based on the very facet of human being. We need to ensure we are in compliance and in coherence with Christian values. This all embodies human dignity. We have the right to culture, and we want to defend the idea of Europe that we believe in. I want to remember Charlie Kirk. His Turning Point project was decisive in ensuring free speech could be regained, but he was assassinated for telling the truth. Here, it's not free speech that's at play. It's also the freedom of thought, freedom of religion, particularly Christian religion. But it goes even further than that. We're talking about the defense of truth. That is jeopardized. Today, it's important to remember the key question: is the truth free? Today, I've invited guests who were clear-headed, and they have decided to fight for the truth and common good. They are fighting state-imposed ways of working, like what the EU is doing in laws and conventions. First, we have Lucy Akeyo, who's speaking firmly for social development in Uganda, linked to defending the family as a fundamental pillar. She spoke about the importance of maternity, of motherhood, and is protecting children in her work. It's an honour to have you here today. Lucy, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. Lucy from Uganda. I didn't know I would speak first, but I'm glad to be back. And thank you for your prayers. I was recently re-elected for another 5-year term as a Member of Parliament. Thank you all for your prayers. It was a difficult, tough election, but we pulled it off with the grace of God. We're here, and I really salute the panelists who are here. I want to thank the organizers for always inviting us. You give us this platform to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Defending the truth in public debates involves a combination of rigorous preparation, ethical communication, strategic engagement to counter misinformation, and emotional manipulation. I am going to talk based on my experience back home, based on my experience when I travel, based on experience when I do a lot of my work. I will start with one of the most difficult public debates that I had. It was in the Parliament of Canada. I was invited to appear before the Foreign Affairs Committee to defend what I believe in so much. And it was such an honor. I knew it was going to be very difficult, but I had to go anyway. When I went there, it was tough. The first person who questioned me thoroughly introduced himself as a pastor and a member of parliament. And the first question he gave me was misinformation. He said, Lucy Akello, you're a member of parliament from Uganda. I know you are the one sponsoring the anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda. I know that this bill wants to kill all the homosexuals in Uganda. And I want to warn you that we will not take this lightly. Well, here I was with a lot of misinformation, and I had to defend myself. I had to talk the truth. And yes, I told him, I am a member of parliament, I stand for the truth, but you have misinformation. And after that session, one of the members of parliament approached me and said, Lucy, I admire you. I cannot do what you do, but what you're doing is commendable. Keep it up. So, in other words, as a member of parliament, she believes that what I'm standing for is the truth. She believes that what I'm standing for is actually good for the world, but she's scared of talking about it. We have many of these people here, and that is why I want to thank you all who are here for standing up for the truth and speaking up. Many people out there would look up to us. Another thing I would want to talk about and comment. This thing is not about winning arguments. It is not about winning. It's going beyond winning arguments, but towards cultivating understanding, trust, and shared reality. When Charlie Kirk died, I followed him, I think, the most. I read a lot about him, and it gave me a lot of courage. It showed me the importance of having evidence, even as you approach your space in defending the truth. When I tabled a motion in parliament, in our Ugandan parliament, and I told them that, look here, as members of parliament, you're seated here comfortably. As ministers, you're seated here comfortably. But do you know that your children are being taught that it is okay to carry out abortion? Nobody could believe me. The speaker asked me, can you give me the evidence that this is actually happening? I had to run very fast to the nearest bookshop to buy the textbook that is being taught to our children. And when I presented this as evidence, then they believed me. So for us to talk the truth in public spaces and engage in dialogue we must be armed with our evidence that will actually shield us. It is not enough to talk, we must speak with evidence. It is also, we must anticipate opposing claims. Like I said earlier on, when I was in the Parliament of Canada, a lot of things were said, but if I did not have the evidence with me, one, I never sponsored that bill. Two, that bill was not after any homosexuals to kill. No, it was misinformation to scare us off and to stop us from doing what was right. I also oftentimes use a lot of questions. When I cannot answer the question, I will ask you a question. I remember there was a motion still in Parliament. I raised a very important matter in Parliament, in our Parliament recently. And my Ministry of Health, with funding from Europe, we are going to start injecting our young girls, ages 10 to 13, compulsory administration of contraceptives to our young girls. When I raised the alarm, the ministry was in shock how I was able to get this information and how I was able to address them. So when I did that, the Speaker was super happy and all the members of Parliament were very happy. And what they did, they said the ministry must stop that policy henceforth and they must erase it from their plans. Afterwards, I got an urgent free interview with BBC Africa. And the interviewer asked me, why are you so biased? Why are you stopping a very good plan to help our girls, to help the young girls, to stop them from conceiving or getting pregnant? I asked him one question. What is so difficult? Is it getting pregnant? Are you scared of the young girls getting pregnant? Or you are more worried about the number of young girls who are going to be infected by HIV or who will get STDs as a result of being exposed to unsafe sex? And then I asked him a question. Are you more, if assuming you are a father or you're a mother and you have a child who is having problems, say with alcohol, say with drug abuse, as a responsible father, are you going to introduce more alcohol to your child? Or you will help your child to stop alcohol? This is exactly what you're trying to do to these young children. You're telling them, it is okay, let's prevent you from getting pregnant, but it's okay, you can go ahead and continue having unsafe sex. You don't care about these children anyway. So when I asked this question, he had no more question to ask me. Now, defending the truth is expensive. It is difficult. I have faced this myself, including being faced with a threat of not getting a visa to travel to some countries. It is okay, as long as you know that you are speaking for the truth. In Uganda, it is now very difficult. We are on some of us are on red. We are on red. We are on a sort of ban from with other countries for passing the anti-homosexuality bill, which many people have never understood. I wish you could ask us what this bill was all about and what this act is about. It was about protecting our children. It wasn't about killing any homosexual, no. It was about protecting our children who were being coerced, who were being forced into homosexuality activities. As we are running out of time, allow me to read this famous quote. This is about speaking the truth and fearing to speak the truth in public space. First, they came for the socialists. I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unions, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This is a famous post-war confession by a German pastor, Martin, about his complexity and inaction during the Nazi regime. Truth can never be hidden. It lasts forever. Thank you so much.
Así es, Lucy. Esta acción se impulsa.
Thank you, Lucy. Without action, the agenda comes forth, but it's an attack against children, it sexualizes children, and it undermines their health. So thank you for protecting children. Moving on to Jesse Okejo Onwakalusi, member of the House of Representatives in Nigeria, has also worked as a lawyer in the Christian Fellowship Organization. His work has been vital in protecting cultural heritage against supranational entities. He's worked very hard to build stable democratic order in his country where there has been persecution of Christians and there has been silence from the International Committee on this issue. Jesse, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply honored to address this 7th Transatlantic Summit convened by the Political Network for Value, a global platform courageously defending human dignity and fundamental freedom at a time when this idea faces unprecedented pressure. Let me begin by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to participate and to invite me to speak on this topic, defending truth in public debate, building space for dialogue. This is not mere professional, but it's a personal to me. It touches the bedrock of democracy and our shared humanity. The recent tragic death of Charlie Cook and Miguel painfully remind us of the dangers confronting those who defend fundamental values in increasing threat of invasion. According to the country, across the continent, promoting life, family, freedom, and truth is increasingly threatened as a position is being silenced, often through censorship, disguised as regulation, rather than through dialogue, aim at consensus. Yet truth is a public that remains the sine qua non for democratic growth. It is the glue for social contract between leaders and citizens. On the complexity of truth, first, we must acknowledge that speaking the truth is extremely challenging. It is challenging because every one of us seated here have a safe haven, what we call or perceive as truth. For us to have a meaningful conversation, it is imperative that we open our minds to the reality that truth is often place and time determined. Truth can only be absolute where people share similar cultural orientation and background. The primary essence of truth is to actualize peace, but seeking truth in isolation without dialogue often produces rancor and disunity. This is why I'm particularly pleased that dialogue appears in today's theme. Dialogue is the main instrument to achieving the peace that truth seeks to bring. Allow me to use a simple illustration. Imagine as a Nigerian that I raised my child in the United States and travel back to Nigeria, and I ask my son, can you buy me a pair of pants? And he returns with the underwear. Truthfully, my son did the right thing, but because of different perception. Even eyewitnesses here will see it that you told him to buy a pair of pants and he came with underwear because of the understanding. Growing up as a child, my grandmother normally used in this Igbo language, and I'm going to use it in my own local language. Meaning, if you insist everybody must see things exactly your way, you remain an island. Democracy at the age of noise. We live in an era of social media where unfettered loud noise but shrink understanding. It is an age when opinion travels faster than fast. Outrageous often replaces reason. Disagreement is too easily mistaken for hostility. In international, it confirmed that many of us feel that the world in a democratic reception, many countries are declining than improving in democratic performance. The Washington Post wrote, democracy dies in darkness. Former US President John Adams warned that democracy can exhaust itself unless defended. Former Prime Minister Winston Churchill observed democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. This work compels us to add that truth is not luxury. It is a foundation for legitimacy and the basis of social justice and the compass for democratic leadership. I use a Nigerian case in Africa, a case study of fragile trust. Let me situate this situation in Nigeria, using Nigeria in 2023 general election. Over 93 citizens registered to vote, yet 26% participated in the presidential election. Similarly, it has been persistent since 2003. This is not voters' apathy, but it is voters' distrust. Blatant misinformation, toxic rhetorics, identified politics, and broken promises have driven many citizens away from democratic participation. Where truth disappeared from public debate, extremism filed a fertile ground. Legal framework for truth and dialogue in Nigeria. Nigerian Constitution, by Section 39, guarantees freedom of expression. And this freedom of expression is limited in the interest of public order and morality. We have other legal framework, like Electoral Act, that criminalizes misinformation and hate speech. We have a Cybercrime Act that addresses online falsehood and harmful digital conduct. Freedom of Information Act 2020 empowers citizens to demand transparency from the government. Broadcasting and media regulation balancing free speech responsibility. This law shows that regulation itself not the enemy of democracy, but misuse of regulation is. The goal must always be to protect truth, not power. I give you a practical example in one of the states, in Rivers State. Political tension between branches of government escalate into legislative paralysis, contested legitimacy, and public protests and media war. Rather than structured dialogue, citizens are subjected to compelling narrative and institutional silence. This breaks down to political act of weaponizing information. Institutions fail to communicate transparently, and dialogue is repressed by confrontation. This result eroded by trust and democratic fatigue among ordinary people in our various countries. Public debate and the democratic purpose. The public debate enables diverse engagement, accessible information, respect structure and tone, and persuasion through reason and not intimidation. Its purpose is not to win argument, but to build understanding and check policies through consensus. Dialogue is the ingredient of consensus. Consensus is the democratic enduring armor. Practical strategies in this defending truth. We must look forward to verifying fact before speaking. Use credible source. Correct misinformation respectfully and promote cultural thinking and media literacy. Building space for dialogue. Create a safe civic space. Listen actively, not to opposing views. Focus on issues and not personality and seek common ground. Standing on truth does not show weakness. It constitutes statesmanship. Recommendation. I hereby propose the 5 guiding principles that we should live an example, committing to fact-based discourse. Secondly, strengthen oversight as legislators, institutionalizing dialogue by partisan and community platform. Invest in civic education, equip young people with democratic value, and protect journalists and whistleblowers. I want to bring to attention many questions I've been receiving. What about the killings in Nigeria? Let me at this point state, I must speak to the painful reality unfolding in parts of Nigeria. The persistent killing of innocent citizens across several states are barbaric and unacceptable in any civilized society. Every life matters, and the continual life for life through violence and banditry and community does not reflect a great insult to the shared value of humanity and democratic value. We expect the government institution to do more, but I must say that for peace, we cannot be imposed by force. It must be built on true trust, inclusion, and responsible government. Closing remark. Disagreement is not strange to politics, but dialogue is the only credible way to lasting consensus. Truth in public debate is not optional. It is a habit of democracy. If we fail to defend it, we risk louder politicians and few statesmen, and more regulation and less legitimacy, more platform, but few conversation. Moving forward, I suggested a war through this platform, and that we should be able to increase champion dialogue and put pressure on various agencies in the United Nations that have gone contrary to the conservative approach. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say that from the Nigerian perspective, Parliament, we make courage to dialogue rather than truth. Permit me to add, 26 years of continued democracy in Nigeria, witnessed a steady progress despite challenges. We invite the global partner to invest in Nigeria with a vibrant youth population and resilient people economy and improved regulatory framework. Nigeria is positioned as Africa's next major economic destination. Our tax laws are clearly clarified. Opportunity spans every sector, and innovation is here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to Nigeria, the place to be. Thank you, and God bless. So, this for you for Nigerian people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Así es, la falta de libertad en la defensa.
Indeed, the lack of freedom, the lack of dialogue, all of this threatens democracy and harmony. This leads to a lack of trust in institutions and a lack of hope for the future. Argentina has showed us that there is an antidote to the poison of communism and gender agenda. Santiago Sartorius, Member of Parliament in Argentina, has been a clear voice speaking out against this challenge. Santiago, tell us about your experience.
Thank you, Margarita, and thank you for inviting me. In Argentina, similar to the rest of the world, because in politics we see that there is debate. This is how we take political decisions that affect everyone's lives. But recently, public opinion tends to be expressed through the media, social networks, which are in the hands of the left. So basically, public opinion was what the left said because they controlled the media. But more recently, a more powerful tool, the most powerful tool in the history of humanity came out, and that is mobile phones and social networks. And so now the most important journalist in the world can get responses from an average citizen who perhaps might not have a high level of education, who works in the fields, but they can speak out and tell people how much poverty they've experienced because of socialism, or saying to these people that their opinion is not the truth, and that these average citizens have been subject to great barbarity for a very long time, and now that's starting to change. Before we used to talk about freedom of expression when it belonged to the left, but now we hear about hate speech. But all that really means is freedom of expression. Because for the left, freedom of expression is everything a part of the truth. You can't say that a child is born of one man and one woman. The left has dominated for so long. They were able to dominate the narrative and by doing that change reality. Now we see that media, the establishment, are feeling that they are under attack. We saw that in Salvador there were tortures, people were being detained. No one spoke out against that. But now we see that the positions have shifted, and now they're saying that they're the victims, and now they're concerned about human rights in El Salvador. Even when human rights were systematically violated in the country, no one was bothered. No one was interested in what was going on in El Salvador. Same thing with Venezuela. They only seemed to care about Maduro when he was captured, when he was a dictator who impoverished his people and didn't respect their rights. Nobody was interested. Now they are. And look at what happened in my country, in Argentina. according to the media, it was impossible for Javier Milei to win the elections. They thought it was absolutely impossible. Many of you may have been surprised that he won the election. It was impossible that he would win the first time. It was even more impossible that he was going to win the second time. And that's something that many of us, know. We've not been able to express our opinions, but now we see that public opinion is being expressed on social media, on social networks. Before, the only way to express our opinion was to go out into the streets. But people don't always have the time to do that. We have to work. The politicians don't understand that. That's the difference between us.
También es...
And I think it's also quite striking that when we talk about hate speech, and it's just used to cancel other people. But if you talk about issues like LGBT, trans, other types of minority who are becoming increasingly powerful, before it didn't used to exist. There never used to be any transphobia. People talk about homophobia, but no one talks about Christianophobia. Nobody talks about the thousands of Christians around the world who are dying. This is something that President Trump has discussed. We see that it's happening in Africa. It's terrible what's happening there. So there is hatred, but this is more complicated. People say, oh, well, you should try and understand what's happening, the context. That's all we get from the media. I think a clear example for me is that if you have a migrant from an Arab country who tortured and killed a child, often the people who speak the truth about this are punished more than the person who actually committed the crime. We see some of the serious crimes that are happening in Europe. The West is under threat. President Milei said this in Davos a couple of years ago. The right have been saying for years now that birth rates were becoming a problem because the left are against birth rates, are against, people are going to become extinct. This is a problem that is being experienced by the majority of countries across this region. And back then, no one would listen to us. We understood that the West was in danger, but we do have the tools that we need to move forward. When Christ was judged, there were two different phases. At the first point, he was accused of blasphemy because he said, "I am what I am," and that was deemed to be blasphemy. Perhaps we can compare this to a hate speech, as if he'd been saying something intolerable, atrocious. And the second judgment by Pontius Pilate was not because of blasphemy, but it was sedition, going against the emperor, the king. And we see that again today when we are told that we are responsible for hate speech, that we're trying to dehumanize people. But that's not the truth, because we believe that all people are equal. We are all created in the image of God. But we're accused of hate speech. And after that, we're told that they're a threat to democracy. And so to defend democracy, they say that they have to cancel us. We see this, for example, when Trump's Twitter account was deleted. There are dictators who have Twitter accounts, no problem, but Trump, as the former president of the United States, he couldn't have a Twitter account. We hear a lot about human rights, defending democracy. It's exactly the same as what happened to Christ. Christ was the problem, because he said that he was the path to truth and to life, and so they had to kill him. This happened 2,000 years ago, and it's exactly the same thing that's happening now. But they won't frighten us. We know that our path is to defend truth and public opinion, because we're not frightened of debate. We're not frightened because we know that we are telling the truth, and we're not afraid of the truth. And we know that without truth, there can be no human rights. There are universal, inalienable rights that each and every one of us have. And without that, we cannot build a democratic society, have real debate. We don't care about consensus for its own sake, because there can be consensus about evil. We want to see justice and peace that have to be supported by truth. Otherwise, it's a lie. Otherwise, this feeling of tranquility, serenity will be based on a lie. And so we have to defend the truth. A lie will always be a lie. And so defending freedom of expression, defending public opinion, and the search for truth is a battle that has existed for centuries now. And for us, this is a fundamental battle in each and every one of our countries, our homes. And to conclude, we know that whether there are many of us or few of us, we know that truth is always the same, and that's what we will always defend. Thank you.
Indeed, Santiago, the imposition of lies the truth hurts them, and they say that we're generating hatred, and they turn themselves into victims. But if we stay silent in the face of evil, we'll be feeding into corruption and criminality, and we'll be complicit. Next, Nicolas Ferreira, member of the parliament in Brazil. He revolutionized the political backdrop with his presence on social media that goes beyond the borders of his country. He's a source of inspiration for youth and for how his clear values, his determination to defend his values. Recently, with the movement Wake Up Brazil, he's committed to free speech. We're looking forward to hear from you today. Tell us a bit more. How many people took part in that movement? Thank you.
Members of Parliament, Your Excellencies, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, being in this Parliament is not merely a personal honor. Above all, it's a clear reminder of what is truly at stake in our time. Parliament exists because throughout history, free societies have understood a fundamental truth. Power must be overseen, confronted, and permanently questioned. And this is only possible where there is freedom, especially freedom of speech. Freedom is not a concession granted by the state. It does not arise from resolutions or administrative permissions. As Frederic Bastiat thought, it was not the law that created freedom. It was freedom that made the law necessary. When this order is reversed, rights cease to be recognized as rights and begin to be treated as favors. And when rights become favors, democracy has already begun to erode. Among all freedoms, freedom of speech is the one that sustains the others. George Washington warned that when it's taken from us, we are led in silence, like sheep to the slaughter. He was not speaking of a sudden coup, but of a slow, almost invisible process in which fear replaces courage and conformity takes the place of debate. It is within this context that Parliament fulfills a central role. It exists to oversee the government, to challenge power, and to represent the plurality of society. Therefore, the freedom of parliamentarians to speak, question, criticize, and denounce must be full and unhindered. When a parliamentarian is silenced, it is not merely an individual who loses a voice. It is the citizen he or she represents. In Brazil, I have experienced this reality firsthand. I was elected federal deputy in 2022 as the most voted candidate in the country. And it's important to explain this to the international audience. In Brazil, electoral campaigns can consume millions in public funds. Mine did not. It was financed by private donations at an average cost of approximately €1 per vote. The internet, as a free space for the exchange of ideas, was decisive in this process. There, ordinary citizens were able to debate politics without official filters, without state mediation, and without prior authorization. And it was precisely for this reason that the reaction came. At the end of that election, my social media accounts were suspended after I requested that the Electoral Court investigated allegations related to the electronic voting system. I did not declare fraud. I did not incite violence. I merely requested an investigation. Even so, I was censored. It became clear that the issue was not the content, but the right to question. Later, as a sitting deputy, I was sued for fake news by the then Minister of Human Rights in President Lula's government after I denounced the government intention to implement unisex bathrooms in public spaces, including schools, something that was explicitly stated in a public resolution issued by a federal council. Shortly thereafter, the same minister was dismissed following allegations of harassment against another minister. The fact I denounced remained true. The lawsuit against me did as well. In another episode, I was questioned by the federal police for having called the President of the Republic a thief in a speech delivered at the United Nations. Whether one agrees with me or not, the central question is, can a parliamentarian be criminally investigated for a political opinion? When that question no longer has a clear answer, democracy has already begun to deform. These facts lead us to a recent and revealing example of the importance of social media as a space for free debate. I published a video criticizing the Brazilian government's intention to monitor transactions conducted through Pix, the most widely used instant payment system in the country. The video surpassed 340 million views. This was not merely an impressive number. It was proof that society wants to be heard, wants to participate in the debate, and does not accept measures that threaten fundamental rights. The reaction was so intense that the very next day, the Brazilian government reversed course and revoked the resolution that would have expanded oversight of PIX, an explicit retreat in the face of popular pressure fueled by social media. These episodes are not exceptions. They are part of a broader trend. They attempt to control public debate under the seductive discourse of so-called regulation. And there is an important point here. This process does not affect only parliamentarians. It cascades downward and reaches the most vulnerable. It affects students in schools and universities who learn earlier on that certain questions must be not asked. It affects teachers who begin to weigh every word out of fear of punishment. It affects pastors, fathers and mothers, ordinary citizens who feel constant pressure to remain silent, even in the face of absurdity. Because if those who enjoy parliamentary immunity are being persecuted, investigated, and intimidated for their opinions, the message received by the ordinary citizens is simple and brutal. Stay silent, or you will be the next. This is the pedagogy of fear. Recently, I perceived even greater clarity the strategy of the censors. It is not merely about defeating the right politically, but about killing it while it is alive, pushing it into invisibility, suffocating its presence on social media, and spreading digital fear so that it paralyzes people in real life. Face this. I made a concrete decision. I decided to launch a movement called Wake Up Brazil. I walked for 7 days, foot by foot, covering 255 kilometers from my state, Minas Gerais, to the capital of Brazil to send a clear message. We exist, we will not accept being pushed into silence, we will not be stopped, neither on social media nor in the physical world. People were calling me the Brazilian Forrest Gump. But it was the best experience of my life. And this was possible because today the internet is the largest public square in the history of humanity. It where ideas emerge, circulated, are challenged, corrected, and refined. Its foundation is freedom. And in Brazil, there are repeated proposals to force the removal of publications deemed potentially false without a judicial decision. This is not regulation. This is a political control of speech. Whenever the state assumes the role of a prior arbiter of truth, debate dies before it even begins. Censorship rarely presents itself as tyranny. It presents itself as care, protection, the fight against hatred or the fight against disinformation. But the final result is always the same: less freedom, less pluralism, less democracy. Defending freedom of speech does not mean agreeing with everything that is said. It means understanding that truth does not arise from imposed silence, but from the open confrontation of ideas. It means trusting society more than the censor. The great challenge of our time is to occupy spaces of dialogue with courage, clarity, and responsibility. That is why this meeting matters. That is why this message must be clear. Defending freedom of speech does not weaken democracy. Defending it strengthens democracy. And this is not a responsibility of one country, one parliament, or one generation alone. This is a permanent individual commitment to the very idea of a free civilization. I will continue with courage to defend my family, my homeland, my faith, and no censor will ever be able to stop me. And I encourage you all to do the same. And last but not least, you all guys can have political powers, you can have the best curriculum, you can have the best network. I think that Europe needs to claim a name above all, that is Jesus. Because when the left hear this name, they tremble. You cannot win this fight without him. Thank you so much.
Es así, vemos que la libertad de expresión.
Indeed, we see that free speech doesn't see exceptions. We see more people being affected. Citizens are seeing their fundamental rights breached. We cannot allow this spread to happen. Repression is instilling a climate of fear in society. And I see that your reaction was to start up a movement, and I see how many people joined you. Moving on to Ronald Portillo, Member of Parliament in Guatemala, was a Vice President in the Community Violence Prevention sector, and we see that he has worked in order to make education and family a tool to reduce crime. He's also committed to religious freedom. In Guatemala, he managed to ensure that every Saturday in August is the Day of the Bible. Thank you, Ronald. You have the floor.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to each and every one of you. I would like to say particular thank you to the Political Network for Values, to the European Parliament, and to Margarida for moderating this panel. Today, this is a crucial topic that brings us together. Europe is experiencing this as well, all too well. You are feeling the effects of excessive regulation on free speech. You're really bearing the brunt of that. Hearing from the panelists, they have spoken about history where there were police of thought and how today, unfortunately, given the regulations that are coming forth, I think we are perhaps on the cusp of returning to what happened in the past. The topic of today's event is important, and particularly this panel, defending truth in public debate and building societies for dialogue. We see that this is a more and more difficult challenge every day, given the number of laws that are coming forth. I brought a presentation with me. I don't think that I'm going to set out any kind of recipe for success or any kind of perfect solution, but there are different focuses, different pros and cons of different approaches that I have heard about when it comes to countering regulation of free speech and regulation of hate speech. I'll talk about 3 models. 1, the USA. 2, Europe. And 3, the inter-American model, which seems to be a bit of a middle ground between the first 2. They all have their pros and cons and their consequences. There is wide-reaching case law showing that courts have applied these different approaches. I think it's important to talk about hate speech. And the problem comes when we try to define what hate speech is. For example, is it about soft censorship when there is an ambiguous or vague definition? Polarization when it comes to different topics. Opinion is more and more fragmented. And then the third point, intimidation, whether it's done by the state or by these fragmented groups that try to bring forth their point of view and put it into public debate. There's a redefinition of language, modern censorship. Santiago, I think, touched on this in his presentation. Telling the truth has become impossible. We're not really talking about women either. We're talking about people who menstruate, for example. So I think that we're really distorting basic concepts and we're undermining the protection that was once afforded to women. The tactic is still the same. They say that they're defending principles, but it's disguised as that. It's really just hate. And then they talk about protecting children, but it's really just intolerance. Intolerance is key. When it comes to the framework, we have a common framework, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 9 says that this is a fundamental right. It's not granted by the government. We're forgetting that at the moment. It's not a concession from the government. Everyone has a right to the basic principle of human dignity. But then we have this question, how can we build the truth? How can we protect the truth in the public debate? We have relativism on one hand. People have subjective views and they say what they think. And that is placed in opposition to authoritarianism, where they control thoughts and control the debate. What are we suggesting? Well, we need to go back to the language of dignity. We need to be looking towards reason, evidence and guarantees, and we need to be present in the technical sphere. Unfortunately, there is over-regulation in the technical sphere, and they're only giving the voice to a dominant majority. That's really damaging, because when we as humans see just one dominant voice, we tend to suppress our own viewpoint, and we are scared to express it. So that's really complicated, particularly when we look at the persecution coming from the state, that there's a real climate of fear being generated. So we need to regain our language, take back control of our language and dignity. We need to look at reason, evidence and guarantees, exceptional rules. We need to look at a case-by-case basis. So that's why I like the 3 models that we're going to touch on. For timing reasons, I will start moving forward through my presentation to the models that I'm interested in. So 1, the US standard. There's no censorship of hatred. Hatred is an expression of emotion, and that's not censored in debate or public speech. They suppress incitation of the incitement of violence. That's the idea of the freedom of ideas. That's the model that they're following. Then, on the other hand, the European model is much more heavily regulated. They don't just regulate this feeling of hatred, but they also regulate racism, for example. And they don't draw a distinction between whether there could be an actual harm done to someone as a result of this. So we're looking at a really restrictive model where they rule out any discussion from public debate. And then the inter-American model, based on Article 13, and there is prior censorship. So you're not prohibited from saying what you want to say, but it's more the consequences of what you say in public opinion that count. So the real consequences. For example, war propaganda or anything that incites violence, that's condemned. We're not looking at total censorship. We want to advocate for open public debate where everything can be said. We want to have debate, but we want to be able to check information as well. That's really what's been happening. I think each of the three models have their pros and cons, and they're backed up by case law. However, our duty today as politicians, parliaments, is to encourage this debate, to promote that. That's important. We need to foster dialogue. And we should only objectively penalise if the ideas expressed lead to a violent act. But falling into relativism or sensationalism or from preventing people from feeling what they feel, people have a right to feel what they feel, even if it's hatred. But if we start doing that, we've gone too far. We need to look at the violent actions that could be caused by what someone says. This is one of the key issues that I wanted to make clearer and look at what Guatemala has experienced in this vein. Here you can see some of the things we've done in order to uphold this. We've built alliances, strategic alliances with religious fora, because free speech and freedom of religion, they're two different things, but they're closely linked. And belief goes hand in hand with being a person, and it's a right to have. We think that sometimes that has been repressed because it's been conflated with free speech. I think it's important to talk about the fact that recently in Guatemala there was a report issued by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights talking about the dissident vote of 2 representatives. They were saying that there was an ideological imposition by the Commission because they'd questioned a public servant who promoted sexual abstinence. The Commission decided that that was a breach of sexual and reproductive rights. But it's important to look at how this decision was brought forth from the body. In this way, they silenced someone who was acting with common sense, protecting family. Dignity cannot be negotiated. We're defending truth. We need to ensure inclusive debate and ensure that education is there to promote this.
Gracias. Muy amable.
Thank you, Ronald, for your contribution. It's true. We see that there is a weaker hand being used to counter these offences in the face of perception or feeling or or so on, that gives a pretext to the cancellation and silencing we're seeing. We'll finish this panel by hearing from Rodrigo Ivan Cortes, Vice Chair of Political Network for Values. He is defending family, life and communities. You have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you. When law becomes censorship and freedom of expression is not allowed, then democracy is at risk. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm starting with this warning because it very clearly describes the current juncture that we're experiencing. In many democracies, freedom of expression isn't being banned, it's being redefined. They're trying to redefine, for example, family and life. Its content is emptied out, it's split in two, and so it means that talking about freedom of expression, freedom of religion, is no longer exercising your right. It's become a hazardous act in some countries. In Mexico, the situation is profoundly concerning. In my country, laws are being used as a tool for censorship. This is not an opinion, this is a documented fact. On the 26th of August 2025, Article 19, Mexico, an organization, said that the legislative frameworks should be urgently revised because currently they're being used to restrict the press through civil, administrative and legal ways. In January and July 2024, there were 54 cases of judicial harassment. 39 journalists, 12 different publications were subject to legal proceedings. So this means that there's a new case every 4 days. Never in the past, even during the very worst of times, did we see this type of level achieved in such a short period of time. Violence against the press is not just limited to physical harassment by criminal organizations linked to the regimes, it's now moving to the courts. We're seeing complaints, administrative procedures who aren't aiming at justice, but try to gag and restrict public debate. And one particularly serious thing here is the incorrect use of gender-based violence. This was aimed at fighting real violence against real women, but now it's being used to censor critical opinions and to eliminate uncomfortable publications, including trying to promote and justify violence committed by men who declare themselves to be women against real women. We're seeing this by legislators. This doesn't just attack journalists, but also citizens, civic leaders, university deans, or members of the opposition. There are some specific legislative attempts at this. For example, the telecommunications law, better known as the censorship law, uses the pretext of trying to limit content that could be called disinformation, but it allows the state to intervene in public expression and uses control mechanisms which restrict freedom of expression. Secondly, mechanism against so-called virtual violence, when we see that anything can become violence, and so this is everything can be a crime. Thirdly, freedom of religious association, which says that it's going to put church activities under government supervision, and that this will be subordinate to an official ideology, including gender ideology. This is not state neutrality, it's ideological control over religious freedom. And this applies to my case. I was first of all sanctioned for rejecting a draft law from a transsexual group of members of parliament who wanted to say that speaking out against them was hate speech. But religious speech is based on the Bible. Also, we see that laws are being used to defend men who declare themselves to be women. I was accused of political gender-based violence. People can be forced into ideological re-education, excluded from public offices, excluded from public life. People, for example, are no longer able to be nominated to public office. The fact, if you, and this happens to men who are white, heterosexual, Catholic men. Also, we see an institutionalization of exclusion. This is supposedly in the name of inclusion, but what we actually see is people are excluded and cancelled. The state is trying to replace parents, prevent criticism, and so it's not becoming stronger, it's becoming more fragile and fragmented. We cannot normalize censorship through unfair legislation. We will not give in when our conscience tells us that we must speak. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. That brings an end to this panel. After this, there will be a working lunch, a networking lunch, and I've been told that there might be some protests going on outside. Is that still the case? No. Okay. So I invite you all to leave the room and enjoy the networking lunch. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Can we take a picture?
Yes, we defend the freedom of speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make sure you take your belongings because we have to empty the meeting room. Tenemos que vaciar la sala. Por favor, retiren sus objetos personales. Please take your personal belongings with you to lunch.